Welcome to The Double Stop. I'm Brian Sword. This week, I have mastering engineer Maor Appelbaum. On this one, I want to do something a little different. I wanted to make it more of a lesson on mastering, what it is, how it's done, and all the things that go into it. So a good chunk of this interview is me picking his brain basically to fully understand exactly what the process of mastering is, because I don't really think I ever really understood it. It was kind of a voodoo magic to me. So we'll go through in detail of the mastering process, and then we talk about some specific projects within his career, like Rob Halford, which he's done quite a few records for. So let's get right to it. This was a really interesting one for me, and I hope you guys enjoyed as much as I did.
I grew up in Israel most of my life, and I've been outside the country a few times. But I've been here in the U.S. for almost 2 decades, and my family was not like a musical family. It more was like they love music, but they didn't play much an instrument. Later on, my parents played a bit, for the fun of it. But and the same with my siblings. So I was influenced by music that my brother and sister were listening to, and also some of the music that my parents had at home, LPs, cassettes, LPs, mostly LPs back then, vinyl, as they say. So it wasn't like a musical family, but again, you're exposed to radio when you're a kid, you're exposed to the record collection at home, and you're exposed to what your brother and sister bring to the table, because they're also listening to stuff.
Now, you're a mastering engineer, but where did your musical journey begin? Was it playing, or was it always on production side?
As a kid, I always liked music, a lot of it, and I played some. I wasn't an accomplished player, but I played bass in some bands of mine, that I had kind of the teenagehood till actually later on, till I would say till my beginning 30s, just on the cusp of the beginning 30s. I was still playing probably till, really the beginning of the 30s. And I was playing bass, and I played some keyboards, and I had different bands of mine. Some played live, some only did music, like rewrote music and recorded. And I was always fascinated by sound engineering, the aspect of amplification of like live sound and recording and tweaking the sound, all that aspect. So that was always something I've really wanted to do, like be involved with that. And I did that. And then I studied sound engineering, and I worked in that, in broadcasting, and I've done some live sound. I've done some, in rehearsal rooms and some shows, and like DJ'd, and I did some in broadcasting. I've done for a while too, for quite a while. And so I was always in that kind of field. And I would say I was hands-on a lot of stuff, especially, when I made my own music too.
So when did you make that decision to focus in on mastering solely?
Mastering, basically, when I went into mastering, for a while I was doing other stuff as well, because I was also working with my own bands, and also kind of jumped to it, but I had to do other stuff. So I would say I'm doing mastering for over 2 decades, but I did some mixing too back then, and other stuff. But so I was doing mastering, but I was doing other things like some live sound, some recording, some broadcasting, of course, and other stuff. And probably I would say that in audio, I'm probably 3 decades, at least 3 decades in, but shifting to mastering probably is 2 decades plus, and then only mastering is probably close to 2 decades only mastering.
And why did you choose mastering of all the different fields you were working in? But you specifically decided to become, the expert in one thing, which was mastering. And why did you decide mastering?
I think it had to do with me having a background in being a DJ at clubs and working in broadcasting, and I had some radio shows that I had a internet radio show before internet radio was still, like, I'm talking about 2004, where it was still new. There were internet radio happening then, but it was still new. And I was also a guest DJ in some radio shows. So doing that, plus I was a music journalist too. So yeah, being the person on the other side, not just the production, but the other side of the production, like the DJ, the music journalist, the broadcaster, the person who takes the final product already finished and puts it out or reviews it. So mastering for me was like the balance of both of these, like the post section of the production, which is what do you do with it later on, and the post release of it, like what are you doing to the production, pre-release, and so the mastering sits basically at the end of the process of the production and the beginning of where it's going to go out, kind of the buffer. And it's the last creative, artistic, and technical aspect of the production, because it's your last chance to make changes in the sound, whether it's going back to fix the mixes because of certain problems that you can hear during the mastering and tweak them, or it's working with it as is and tweaking the sound to work the dynamics better, the translation to different systems, the tone of the sound, the loudness, the brightness, darkness, the emphasis on certain elements of the mix. You can do a lot of things on the overall shape of the sound, and it's an artistic element that is there, and it's still creative, but there's also like a technical aspect, and it's the marriage between all these elements, and basically it's the final touch. And it could be a minimal touch, which even if it's 3 to 5%, that's still at the end of the day part of the whole 100% that's perceived. Or it could be 20, 30, even 40, and sometimes even you find yourself making a lot of suggestions to fix problems in the mix, and now you're getting into really helping out to shape the mix because of the suggested to fix it.
I think mastering is a bit of a voodoo science for a lot of people, myself included, who don't fully understand exactly what it is you do. So the album songs, whatever, get mixed, and what do you get sent? Is it just a WAV file of a mixed song and that's what you work with, or is there something else? And then what exactly do you do to it?
Okay, well, first of all, let's start with what we do technically and artistically. Okay, so we're the final part of the process. So there's a place in that process where we communicate with the production, either the producer, mixer, artist, all of the above. And what we do is look at what the expectations are. Are we looking at, do we need to make it louder? Sometimes mixes come in at the exact level they need to come in, and they don't need to be louder. They need to be maybe a dB or two louder. Maybe they don't need to be. Maybe you have to stay in their place. But maybe we need to clean up some low end or smooth up some high end or mid range. So we're a second set of ears basically doing a QC. That's like on the minimal aspect of it. It's a bringing a fresh objective and new perspective to it. So I hear it in a different environment than where it was mixed. I hear it on a different set of speakers, different set of rooms, different equipment. And then the other thing is that there might be things that they want to do to the mix where only later on they know. Like, for example, they might feel that the mix is too dull and they need some more brightness. We can do that then, overall. Or it's a bit sharp and they need to smooth it out. Same with low-end frequencies. If sometimes there's too much and it's not letting the mix pop out because it's a bit grumbly, we can clean that up. Okay, that's like on the very, that's when it's very minimal, okay? Now think as mastering as a presentation of something. You go to a museum, you see a picture. You can say you're looking just at the picture, but in reality you're looking at a picture, a frame, a wall, a light, okay, or a few lights in a certain height where the picture is. All those things come into effect of the result that you see from the picture, because you don't see the picture on its own. So if, let's say, you have a very colored picture with a white frame, it's going to contrast the colors. Same thing if you have a brown frame. It's going to contrast it differently. Now, if the picture is sitting alone on that wall, no other pictures, you're focused on that. That's kind of like how a single is. But if you have different pictures, now you see a few. Now you want to create some consistency between them. That's like in an album. Also, the way the light is positioned in front of the painting, if it's from above, if it's from below, from the side, it will emphasize certain areas in the painting, and it will create different contrasts. So that's how you're going to perceive the picture. That's why when you go to a museum or to a gallery, the curator brings in the pictures, but there's an artistic involvement with how these pictures are presented. The distance between them, if they have a frame or they don't have a frame, and if they have a frame, what type and size of frame, metal, wood, thick, thin, if the frame goes in or out, how the lights are positioned in that gallery. All of these things affect how you visualize by, how it comes into you and how you perceive it, and then how it's stuck in your memory. That's kind of like mastering. In mastering, we take the picture. The picture is the mix, and mix is part of, it's part of the production. So the picture has the production, the recording, and the mix in it as a total. And then the mastering is putting the frame or shedding the light on it and positioning it. So it can affect how you perceive it. Some mixes come in very well balanced, but they don't have enough color and energy. And then we give them some vibe and energy and mojo, and great. Some mixes have good energy, good vibe, but they don't have good balances. And we can't fix the balances, but we can clear up some stuff, which makes you feel like there's better balances. Some mixes come in with no color, no mojo, no balance, nothing, and you try to do your best to just make it sound like it was intentional to be like that. You give it a certain vibe and energy, and then people perceive it as like, oh, okay, that's what they wanted, okay. And then they vibe with it. And some come in perfect with the vibe, with the energy, with the balances, and then your job could be how much I can enhance that and extend that feeling, or how much I can extend the groove better to the listener. Or if it's perfect, like really perfect, either you make a small touch just to clear up something or smooth something. And there are times that sometimes you just do a transfer with the system and it just adds a bit of vibe to the sound. It's rare that it's a flat transfer with nothing, but it can happen as well. There's records I've done that there were songs that were just put in the sequence where others were adjusted. But sometimes even just putting them in the sequence and you just adjust the volume between them to make it sound more cohesive with something else, even that is part of the process, figuring out which level it needs to be in comparison to the other songs, or if it's on its own, if that volume is fine or you need to add a bit or stay within the realm, or there's so many ways to approach it, and each one can give you greatness, but it could also give you the opposite of greatness. Like, they can all bring something good and bad. It's just whatever you're bringing to the table, it's a choice. You might think it's bad, but the artist thinks it's great, or you might think it's great, but the artist thinks it's bad. So everything is it has two sides or three sides to every coin in this case.
Now, this molding of the sound, is that done through EQ, or is there a whole bunch of software that I would never understand?
Okay, so it doesn't have to be software. It could be hardware. Okay, we're still looking at the analog and digital domain, and so we're having hardware and software. Those things that you can apply to the sound, they're basically different types of processing. It could be equalizers, could be compressors, limiters, could be multi-band compressors, single-band compressors, stereo wideners, tube and solid-state processors. Some of them are just line amps. They just run through them, and that makes a sound because there's a certain coloration to that circuit. It could be even the console itself that you're running through. It could be the converters, the digital to analog, and then the analog to digital. Each processor or each device in the chain will impart a certain sound. Some will be more transparent, some will be more colored, and some will be everything in between. So you can go from super clean and transparent to super colored and dirty, but everything will impart something to a degree. So you're never going to get like only one thing. There's a lot of things that could be involved, and they all affect. It's just some of them are so minute that you might not notice, but they're all part of it. So they do something. And sometimes you only hear what they do when they're combined with other clear stuff. So then each one adds its own flavor, but you kind of run the gamut between the clean and the dirty, or the clean and the colored, and find what works. And sometimes you really got to stay clean as much as possible. But you have, but also just so you know, when it comes to audio processing, everything the chain affects. So it could be the DAW you use, because each one has a different sound and effect. It could be your interface affecting it, your converters, your clocking, your cables, your even the cleanness of your electricity in the room. If you're in a building that shares the electricity with a bunch of people, and everybody's like running high power stuff, it will affect the electricity, and that can affect the noise that comes into your system. Even, if you're near antennas, like phone antennas, you can get like beep, 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 like noises in.
Now, when you're doing a mastering on a studio album versus a live album, is it the same process, or do you have to approach it totally differently?
Well, an album or an EP or a single, all of these are different entities of the product, okay? A single is one song and it's not connected to anything else. An EP is a compilation of a few songs, and an album is a compilation of a bigger amount of songs, but they all have a theme to them, okay? So when you're doing live records, the theme is not just the music, but how the live show goes. So when you're doing a studio album or EP or single, you're looking at it as this is the song only, like as a production, recording, editing, mixing, mastering. When you're looking at a live recording, now the environmental part of it, which is the live, needs to get through to the listener, because either he knows the song, either he or she or them, they know the songs and now they hear it in a live format, or they don't know the songs, but they still need to feel that live environment, right? So in live singles, you hear the crowd and all that, but it's still part of like a single. Well, when it comes to an EP, live EP or live album, then a lot of the transitions between the songs are also very important, because you can either take long transitions, and make them like, and let the people like applaud and all that. But there's a function of timing, how long you want that to happen, especially if there's no video involved. If there's a video, then the eyes are taking the front seat here, and they're more attentive to what they see. So audio will become secondary at that moment, even though it's a live album, but the eye is looking at what's there. So if you make shots of the audience and you stay along at the audience, but you see different people, then you're not getting bored because you're occupying the visual aspect. But and that's why certain records also have a DVD or Blu-ray portion of it, and a lot of times the CD version will be different than the DVD version. Sometimes even tonality wise. For example, let's say they use certain instruments like Taurus pedals, which are bass pedals. Sometimes in the CD version, because you can't see them pressing on them, then or there's a certain instrument like a lead guitar, for example, in the live version of the CD, you might not hear the guitar go up, but on the DVD, sometimes they will go up in volume a bit, because let's say they're giving more footage to that guitar. So some things change in live between only audio format and audio and visual format. So it's not uncommon to have a CD version and a DVD version, and they'll be different in the sound. Also, like I said, in terms of the crowd, when you have video, you have more leeway to give longer segues a lot of times, because you can see the visual and there's something happening there that will occupy your eyes. But in CD or streaming, a lot of times you want to edit it, so it's not too long, and you want to keep the energy going. So spacing is a bit different in that case. Also, another thing you got to keep in mind that, in a live show, whatever the live recording is, you want to make sure that the audience feels that energy and stay with you. So sometimes there's going to be changes in the pacing between the songs, because you want to move that energy so the record is not like steady in live. It starts to move forward, or sometimes you want to pace it so there's more spaces in the middle, maybe to kind of create like energy in the beginning and then kind of a relief and then more, which applies to normal records as well, not just live records. But in live records, you find that a lot because of the audience element. And also, you want to make decisions based on the songs are a lot of times not at the same uh, speed as the studio ones,
Right.
because a
They're
lot of
usually
times
faster.
they're faster. Yeah. Yeah, most of the time they'll be faster, but sometimes they even can go slower. But yeah, they're not usually the same pace. Sometimes they are, but that's also a consideration you want to put in when you're doing, and also you got to be the audience. You also listen to it as an audience.
When you're working on records with different artists, do they ever come join you to work with you, or the producer or the mixer? Do people come with you, or are you pretty much always isolated? You get their notes, you do your work, you send it back, get their feedback, maybe revise it, maybe not. Are you a lone artist, or are you working with a team at this point?
It's a mixed bag because some artists want to be involved in the process. They want to see what you're doing and hear it. They don't always have to tell you what to do, but sometimes they just want to be involved, like, on the, like, to receive it in real time. And then if they need any changes, they can say on the spot. Some artists like to come here and listen a bit to music, just feel it, and then wait for the result. Same goes for producers and mixers. Some of them want to hear their music here and see how it sounds, and they'll leave it for you to work on. Or sometimes they want to be here. Due to the distances, especially nowadays when a lot of people are remote from each other and they make records like that, I would say most of the work is remote. I'll do it. I'll send it over. They'll listen to it. They need changes. They're reach out by phone, talk with me or text or email. I think that's the majority of the work. Still, once in a while, people come in. Sometimes they just come in because they want to kind of work with you a bit, and then they leave it. Like, yeah, do your thing. And then there are people who never want to be here. Like, they can live close and not even come because they don't want to hear their music in an environment they don't know. And then it could kind of trick them because now they're hearing details they didn't hear before, and now it will make them overthink things. They don't want to be involved with that. They want to hear it in the environments that they know, where they can judge it and say they like it or not. And it's not uncommon that, when a client will come in, either producer, mixer, or artist, to a room that sounds very detailed, and now they hear every little thing that they didn't hear before. It's like a magnifying glass for them, and they might now think things are wrong for them because they hear it in a way they didn't. So I don't encourage them to come or not to come. I basically want them to work the way they like to work in terms of the receiving end. I do request that they listen on different systems as much as possible, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure they're happy and they've checked it on their systems that they always listen to music, make sure it translates to what they like. So I think it's a mixed bag, but nowadays it probably tends to be less attended than before, at least here. And just remember, a lot of my work is international based. So it's rare that somebody from Europe or South America or Asia or Africa or Australia or even in America, in the state, East Coast, whatever, it's rare that they'll come here. But who wants to get stuck in traffic?
When you're working on a record now that vinyl has made somewhat of a comeback, are you mastering it once and that's it for CD, streaming, and vinyl, or do you have to master it separately for each platform?
So I get hired for different things. Sometimes I get hired only for like digital, streaming and CD. And then sometimes they want also vinyl. And sometimes I only get hired for vinyl remastering too, like special editions, limited edition types. so each project entails different things, so when I talk to the client, I ask them, up front, what's the output formats? What are you going to do? You're going to do this, or that. Now, different formats can require different approaches. Again, it depends, even in vinyl, there's special releases that will go like to high fidelity, and others might not go to that way. Sometimes they'll cram more minutes than needed on a side of an LP, and it affects the quality, but the price of vinyl is very expensive, and sometimes they go above what a normal LP should be, and they cram it in, and then the quality gets affected. So there's a certain amount of how much you can get away with that. Vinyl is always different than what CD and streaming will be. I would say, CD or high res will have a certain sound, and vinyl will have a different sound due to the physical element of it, because it's being cut and then pressed, or cut and plated and pressed. Depends if it's DMM or if it's lacquer. So each one of those parts of the process will affect the sound of it. Now, you can do a great cut, but if the plating is not that good, it's going to affect it. And then pressing as well is not good. Or you could have great pressing, but if the cut was not good, it's not going to sound good, because that's the source there. So you want to approach it based on what the project is. And some records are just done like that, just for the vinyl. Some of them are just released on vinyl, and they're done very high quality as much as possible. And in some records, I actually go to the cutter, to the cutting engineer, and sit with them and supervise the cut, listen to it, make sure it sounds good. And if I think we need some changes, then we make changes during the cutting process to enhance certain things that get lost during the process. So that's when the client has enough time and budget to put into getting it cut right. And if I can be involved, then I come in too.
Now, when you're mastering for vinyl, do you have to be concerned about making sure the bass isn't too loud? I remember, at least back in the day, if it was too much bass, the needle would jump. Is that still a concern, or are the levels basically the same between CD and vinyl?
So bass, basically, it's not just bass, even high end. So when you have too much bass, it can jump from the groove. Yeah, but at the same time, it's more of a phase thing that can happen too. So if there's a phase issue with the bass, then it can jump. Usually if there's too much bass, then the groove can be traveling too far, and it can touch the other grooves. But on the low end, you have the amplitude, of course, and the phase. So you want to keep it balanced, but some records can have a lot of low end. Depends on, the grooves and the length. And then the other thing you have to take in consideration, that certain high mids and high end can also do some damage to the cutting head, and also it could sound harsh. So there's limitations in the low end, there are limitations in the high end. Even the mid can get like too hunky sometimes. So it's a physical medium, and it has a sound from the cutting perspective, and and the medium itself. So there are things to consider. Some of the stuff is best left just to the cutter, because they're machines. They know the cutting lathe, and they know the system, so they can work it. And some stuff you got to kind of prepare for it, because you don't know what they're going to do, because there's some pressing plants will have a lot of material being fed, and they cut like an OEM, like they have someone cutting for them, and they have to feed it, and not always they can put the QC to it, like really sit on each one and make sure it's good. In that case, it's a hit or miss. Sometimes you got to do stuff for that. Sometimes it's just you wish for the best. It's a very, very volatile format. It's a lot of it is hit or miss or anything in between, and sometimes really good companies can just make a bad cut or make a bad press of it. You never know. That's why you have a test press to listen to. But definitely there's things to consider, and the better cutters do a better job. And sometimes it's not just their ability to cut, it's also their system. If they have a really, really good system, then the transfer is much better. It's the same with everything. You got to have the whole thing, you know.
Sure. Do you have a specific format you think audio sounds the best on?
You know, it's going to sound funny what I'll say, but a lot of people will think high res is better, but, you know, CDs sound great. If a CD is done good, it's great. You know, 16-bit 44.1 sounds really good. I mean, some of the best records ever sound amazing on a CD. You know, 16-bit gives you 96 dB of dynamic range, or signal to noise ratio maybe would be the right, you know, term of, or both of them if you want to call it. It's a lot. Now, yes, you can have 24-bit and have a higher resolution, and then of course you can go, you know, 48 kilohertz and 96. And I personally find that sometimes higher resolution formats don't always sound that great because they reveal also more problems. You know, if you have a really good resolution on your screen, now you can see things that not always look that great. You know, everything requires something to be on that level. If you have an amazing recording at a high res and you can keep that in the mix and in the master with no problems, then it's going to sound amazing that way. But not everything translates better to high res. Some stuff has machine noise, you know, noise floor has problems that on the low resolution it doesn't catch it, but in the higher res it does. So I don't have a favorable format. To me, it has to sound really good on 16-bit 44.1, which is CD quality. And if it sounds great there, that's the beginning. Now, if it sounds better in high res, great. Awesome, I'm happy. But if it doesn't sound great in high res, but still sounds great in 16-bit 44.1, that works. And I'm saying 16-bit 44.1 WAV file, not MP3. Okay? MP3, that's a different case, and MP3s can sound good too. Some of them will sound really good, you know, if the codec and the transfer is good. But again, I think that things should sound good at 16-bit 44.1, and if they sound good there, that's the minimum. And if I get something sounding less good in higher res, then I'll just go for the 16-bit because it sounds great there. You know, I can tell you that I've heard very high res recordings that sounded amazing, but then when they were downsampled, it changed them very much. So that's why a lot of times I think that the platform you're going to use to listen to, you don't know what they do in the back. Like, you don't know if they upsample, downsample. You don't know what the process is. So it's very hard to know what is the real result of it, you know, because they can accept high res, but they'll play it back based on your bandwidth, and then they might lower the bandwidth of it and change the sample rate and bit depth.
Okay, let's talk about remastering. So you've remastered quite a few projects in your career. So when you do take on a remastering, is the process that you're taking the already mastered audio and then doing it again, or do you get the files pre-mastering and then kind of move forward with it?
Great question. So the field of remastering is filled with a lot of types of materials that come in. A lot of times you actually get a mastered file already, because either they lost the original tapes, they lost the original, whatever they had, and they're left with either files that they had or a CD that is ripped. Those things happen. And sometimes you're even using remasters of masters because that's sometimes the situation of what they have left. They can't find anything else. So you could be starting from really, really not great results, because you never know who was remastering the master, and sometimes it was just, just make it louder, or just make it brighter, and it's already not sounding that great. And sometimes, it sounds okay, but people expect a different sound, so now you need to alter that. Now, that's a situation where you're working with either something that came out already and that was the master, or which is okay in some cases, or you're working with the remaster of the master, which, if it was a good remaster, that's a great thing to do, to work with if it's a really great one. But if it's not a great one, then it's the opposite of even the original. It's like they even ruined the original. So that's a hard situation, and I've worked with situations where I had to master from a master or from a remaster, and sometimes it was a remaster of a remaster, which can go even worse. And then you just need to figure out how do you make the sound, more appealing, and sometimes they just want a different sound. That's the situations that are more the extreme, but they're getting more and more like that today. Then there's two other types of remasters. One of them is you get original tapes, but apparently they're not the original tapes that were ending up being the versions, which means that these were safety copies. And you don't know that. A lot of times, they don't even know that. And a lot of times it's because it's in a vault and they don't know that that was a safety copy that was copied from one. So already a generation loss. Or back in the day, they would print to let's say a 1/2 or 1/4 machine, but at the same time they'll run a DAT tape, and the DAT tape was recording from the console and not always from the tape machine. So the sound that went to the DAT tape could be direct from the console, which will result in a totally different sound than what will be recorded from the 1/2 or 1/4 from the console, because the 1/2 or 1/4 will have a sound. It was an analog version, analog sound, or if there was another tape involved. So you never know what was in the chain. Now, if the safety copy was coming out from the tape, that's a different case. But again, you never know what was in the chain. You don't know if it was just a copy from the tape or a copy from the going through the tape electronics, just to that, or directly from the tape or directly from the console. And I've had situations where I was working on a remaster and it didn't sound right, and it was a safety copy that was recorded directly and it didn't have the sound. So that can happen too, okay? And then there's the original material, which is the original. That's the best situation you can be in most of the times, because then you have as long as it's in a good condition, it's, as long as the tape is in great shape and transferred well, then you have probably the most freedom, because it's not loud yet, it's not either bright or, it's like, or dull. Like it is what it is. So if it's dull, you have the ability to brighten it up. If it's too bright, you can dull it away and darken it away. But again, if you have the original, you have the most freedom, okay? But if the CD was done well, and you get now the original, you have to top what the CD was doing. That's another challenge, because some records, a lot of the sound that we like is a result of the whole chain, including the mastering. And then when you get it without that mastering, where it's naked, it doesn't always translate same as what the actual final version was. And now you want to try to up the game and make it even better than what the master was there. And that's not an easy task, especially if it was done really, really well. And those are some of the challenges that in the remastering you got to do. Now, that being said, I was now talking about technical stuff, right? When you remaster something, your aim really is to enhance it in a way that is still related to the original. You don't want to alienate people from what they know. You want to make them feel like this is an improved version that gives them more excitement. So if back in the day the sound didn't have as much low end or high end or separation due to the gear that was being used in the formats, and now you can do that, then you want to give that bandwidth for it. You want to make sure it's bigger and open and more clarity, so the listener will experience it, what he knows, but now he has a wow factor. It's even better. But it can happen the opposite too. It could be like, oh, but now I don't enjoy it as much. Yeah, it has more low end or high end or this or loudness, but I don't like it as much. Then that's less good. But it's hard to figure out what will work great for that, because everything you're adding can be actually subtracting from the listener, because if he likes it in a certain way, now you change it for him, they'll be like, I like the original better. So it's very challenging to make a remaster that's really cool and like really impressive and makes the listener engage with it even more. Because anything you're doing, you're changing from the original. And that's a challenge by itself, because it's easier to ruin it. And there's always going to be people who are just going to like the original because they grew into it, they got married with it. And anything that you'll change is like, oh, it's not the same for me. And that can happen too. That's why it's very hard to make it better for everyone. And you know, just like with art, there's always somebody who's going to say, oh, I like it differently, or, you know, or, you know, I like the band when they were like this, you know, it's like everybody, or that, or when they were older, younger, or opinions. There's a lot of opinions and tastes factors. And so remastering is I love doing it, but it's a challenge on its own. And the only thing I can compare to remastering is when you work with legacy bands and there's a big time gap between records, and they still want their fans to feel that it's the same band that they were before. And you kind of got to figure out, you know, how to keep that vibe and tone that they have, but to the next release. So in legacy bands, you also have that thing where you don't want to alienate the audience. If they do it musically, that's a different case. But if they keep the music like in the vibe of what they were known for, and sonically it's also keeping the vibe, you want to also keep that vibe and make sure that you're not alienating people from the sound that they're acquainted with.
Mastering is the last link in the production chain, and deadline and delays can happen all kinds of reasons all the way through, but often the delivery date for that record, for the record label, is not allowed to change. So how do you handle it when all of a sudden your time gets limited because delays that happened earlier that you have to deal with now?
Some will call it story of my life. You know, we're the least engaging part of the process because we have the least amount of time to work on something. and also we're in the end of the chain. Usually we're not as much with the artist as the recording process or mixing process. So our involvement is the least. At the same time, there could be a lot of pressure on us to deliver on time. And sometimes there's revisions and they have to go back on the mixes to fix, and now there's more stress. In a perfect world, everybody will have extra time to master it and then go back and listen. And I try to be like that with most of my clients. Like, I deliver on time, hoping that they have extra time to check it. If there's no rush into it, I always recommend to the clients, take a week, make sure you're happy with the mixes before you're sending them off to mastering, because if you have revisions, then it's going to be harder to do because then you're more on a time crunch. So make sure everything sounds good. You tested it. You're happy with it. Then when you're coming to mastering, have the extra days needed to not only do the mastering, but, to listen to it and live with it and make sure you're happy with it, because, last moment changes can happen, but you want to have some leeway so you don't regret being like, well, I had to make it on a certain deadline, so I missed this or that, or that can happen, and you want that to be least of your concerns. So it's important to have leeway for time. But in today's TikTok world, or whatever it's called, like consumption that is quick, people consume things quick, and they bring these deadlines that they need it now. Okay, like with vinyl, for example, there's months of wait sometimes to get vinyl pressed. So I understand why there's a rush, and probably there was always a rush for something. There's a release schedule. We got to print CDs for a show. There's always something, right? But I always recommend having leeway of time to get it right and not to regret later on that things were rushed. But it happens. Yeah, there's things that, they need it now. It's like, really? It's a Saturday. They need it now? Yeah. It's a Sunday. Or, yeah, they need it now. Really? Friday night, they need it like 2 a.m. Really? Yeah, but and sometimes they'll just say that, and they don't mean it. They say that because they want to have it in their hands, and then they'll take a month till they do something with it, or a week or so. But sometimes they really need it. Sometimes there's something happening, and they need to put it in that release schedule, or it's tricky. It's tricky, especially also, like I said, if they have vinyl and they need to feed it in, or there's an event they put it in. Yeah, that's not the easy part of the process, and it could be stressful. But we're contracted to do that stuff. Just like, if you had now a big interviewer, and he's like, yeah, I can only do it 4 a.m. Take it or leave it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, what you're saying reminds me of the last Mr. Big record, which was not your record, but there was a whole lot of drama about it because it came out and there were some complaints about the sound, and then Billy Sheehan blamed a rushed mastering job because the Japanese label had a firm deadline that they had to meet, and then Frontiers made a big announcement, it wasn't us, we had nothing to do with this. It was a whole drama because of a deadline. Like, it must have kind of broke your heart to see the poor mastering engineer get kind of blamed for a record that some people decided didn't sound very great.
There's a saying, to success there's one father, to failure there's many orphans. I don't know if you can blame a mastering engineer for a bad job if he was rushed to it, because at the end of the day, he's doing something, and the band needs to approve it. Someone needs to approve it. Even if like, he could do his best under the circumstance, but if nobody's listening and saying, okay, can you change this? Can you change that? And there's not enough time, then it is what it is. And I've seen this happen with some of the biggest guys. Like, rush jobs. Yeah, that's a situation where there's more chances the things not happen well, then yes. And if they do happen good, that's great. But yeah, rushing something to that extent, especially when it's the final thing, not always good. And even in mixing, that happens. There's records that if you listen to the record, you'll hear a lot of mixes are good, and then one mix is okay, but not as good as the others. And a lot of times they ran out of budget or ran out of time, or time and budget together. And those things happen all the time. And they've happened decades ago, and they still happen. And, some records were done in 2 days. Some records took 4 years to do, but that's one of the things that you got to take in consideration. I've had records that came to me like a day before, and they were not in good condition, and I had to deal with it. It is what it is. And I was not happy. And then, the client was happy at that time, but 2 months after the record is out, they listen to it with less stress, and they're like, sounds like this, sounds like that, could have been different. Yeah, of course could be different. If you had 2 weeks to work your mixes better, I would have better mixes to work with, and then I could give you better results. But they came in all sounding harsh because you guys were rushing and you were like on tour. So the only times for you to listen to the record was after the show, where your ears are like already been worked out too much, or maybe, you're on the bus and reception is not good, like internet, and you download MP3s and I don't know, your earbuds are not the best, and you're making decisions based on that. That's not ideal situations. They happen, but they're not ideal. So, sometimes we don't know that those circumstances are really what dictate the result. And I mean, at the end of the day, you don't know what's involved in record making. Each record is different. Some records just flow great. Some have obstacles all the time. So, when you're judging someone else's work, you got to take into consideration, you don't know what's coming in. I've done records where same record was released twice, different mixes. The first one was crappy, like super crappy. Second one was crappy divided by 6. So you had 6 mixers do different things, and some were crappier, some were less crappy, and some were horrible. Some of them were okay. And then they blamed the mastering guy. Seriously, why don't you take responsibility for just doing wrong on that record? Why can't you say, oh, we messed up. We brought people who didn't know what to do, there was one time, I won't mention it, but won't mention the name, but I remember working on a record and calling the label and saying, guys, did you really take the time to listen to the record? And they're like, no, why not? We don't need to. I'm like, okay, well, just so you know, it sounds bad. They're like, oh, it doesn't matter. We'll sell from it. And then 3 weeks in, I get a rush call. Hey, we need you to redo this with new mixes. Why? Well, our friend heard it and he said it's bad. Oh, you need your friend to tell you that it's bad, and you don't take my word for it telling you it's bad? Well, he's a friend of us, and so what? I'm telling you, it was crap from the beginning. You made mistakes all the way, And then, oh, well, okay, but now we need you to do this. Okay, well, still, this sounds crap too, but it's less. And those things happen. Don't think for a second now that everything is perfect. Things just mess up, especially when there's quick deadlines. There's, especially when you're dealing with emails. I remember I was telling that record, they were like, oh, I tell them that there was one mix that was bad and I needed a new version. They're like, okay, we'll email the guy. I'm like, what do you mean email? Well, we'll email him and he will say it and we'll communicate. I'm like, you want it today, right? Yeah, you need to be on the phone with him right now. I don't know when he checks his email. They're like, well, everybody has smartphones and they can check. It's like, yeah, but you never know if he's going to look at it now. You need to reach him. They were like, they're like, It's like, really? Seriously? You want me to finish this record now and you're not going to put the effort in calling the person? You're just going to send him an email? And that just tells you the state of affairs of where we at, It's like, no wonder you're going to mess up something, You're dropping the ball because, you don't have enough time to work on a record. You're trying to release something because of a release schedule that maybe makes sense on a promotional level. But if you're going to promote something that is not the best work, what are you doing now? You know what I mean? Like, it's like you're sending something out that's not the best it could be. You could say it's the best it could be with the given circumstances, right? But the repercussions of it is going to be worse. So those things happen, and either the mastering engineer gets blamed, the mixing engineer gets blamed. The artist is never getting blamed for that, right?
One final question on the mastering side. I have a few more questions about specific artists, but on this,
you can ask.
Nice lesson you're giving us on what it is to master. Has it ever happened that, like you talked about how you get mixes, some you love, some you don't. Has it ever happened where you got a mix where you heard it and you were disappointed? And I don't want to hear artist names. I'm just saying you got a mix that you didn't think was great. As a mastering engineer, were you able to save that project that when it was done, you thought it sounded great? Or is it not possible to kind of polish it that much?
I have a saying, you can't polish a turd, but you can make it smell better. Okay?
Yeah.
Sometimes something comes in not really good. But if you find I won't say the word right, because some will say right, wrong, but if you find the elements that can be attributing to it, then you can up the game on it. So for example, if it's horrible, you can maybe make it listenable, or horrible to worse or bad, or you know what I'm saying? Like, there's a place where you can up the game on it. And sometimes what happens is the aesthetic works. For example, something comes in and it's very lo-fi. If you enhance the lo-fi of it, then it will sound intentional. And then the audience doesn't perceive it as something bad. They seeing it as an artistic, aesthetic replication of what the intention was. It's kind of fooling somebody in a way, but you can create that feel. You can think of it as, let's say you're recording with an old camcorder, from the 80s, 90s, okay, because that's the camera you have, and people could say, oh, this looks bad. But let's say you take that recording and you add to the image in editing, you add like more like kind of a sepia look, or like black and white, or kind of a dirty film look, then people won't say, oh, he did it with a camcorder in a bad way. They would look at it, oh, what an interesting approach. Very artistic and vibey. Okay. So that's things that can be done in mastering. And I've done that a bunch of times where I just found where the aesthetic can work. And I would apply that aesthetic and it make the listener think that that's how the band wanted it to be, which at the end of the day was, because they approved it. But it wasn't from the get-go what I got. Like, what I got was very different from that. But we brought it to that type of sound, and then it becomes an artistic intention. And for the audience, that's their vision. It's like, oh, that's what they wanted to present to me. And they don't know that it's very far from the representation of what I was given. But that's what they get.
Yep, that's cool.
And
that
that's
makes sense.
intentional. And that's when we do it on an intentional level. and it's really alienating it from what it was, to the point where that's a different thing. But that's not done unless it's intended to go that direction. And sometimes that saves the day. So there's records that if you hear the original and you hear the master, you'd be like, wow, they're very different. But it's not, I won't say that's a day-to-day case. It's only when needed. And there could be a week with a bunch of them. There could be a week with one of them. But that's another approach we can do. And I think the same thing applies to production. You know, you can take a song that's only a piano and a singer, and you can produce it the same way. Or if it doesn't sound right, you can now add other arrangements to it, you know, and add drum loops, and you can add vocal lines, and, you know. So there are certain things you can add in production, but in mastering, if I do, I'll do it in, you know, in that direction. You also asked a question before about what I get. Now, in most cases, I only get a stereo left and right, you know, mix. But there are mastering engineers that take stems, which are like different parts of the mix that are just together. So you have like a drum, bass, guitar, vocals, keyboard. I don't like to work with stems. I like to work with a stereo mix, because if there's any changes in the balances, they can just give me, like if we need more vocals, they can give me a vocal up version or a vocal down, but it keeps the balances. Whether with you work with stems, you're actually creating a sub mix of the stems and you're changing the balances. So you can do that in mastering too. You can really change, you know, balances if you're doing stems.
Let's just move on to talk of a few artists that you've worked with and some of your experiences. It seemed like Rob Halford is a great place to start. You've done live records for him. You've done studio records for him. How did that relationship with him begin?
So Rob Halford, as you know, he's an icon. He's a legend. You know, working with such an artist by that caliber, and he's a pioneer in a bunch of, you know, ways, and totally inspirational, right? The work that I've done on those Halford records started when I was doing a remaster of a remix of Fight. So basically it's a mastering of a Fight record called Small Deadly Space. And that record came out really nice. And then Roy Z is the person who produced and mixed those records. And after we did that record, the Fight record, we did a bunch of other records together, me and Roy. We did an Yngwie Malmsteen record and a bunch of other stuff. And then when the Halford stuff came in from him, it was the first thing we did was some live tracks. I had like bonus tracks that we did together, and then there was a Rock in Rio DVD which had different mixes, 5/1 and stereo, and there was another mix that I mastered. And then I did some live records and studio records. The first studio record I did for the band Halford was Winter Songs, which was Halford 3. And then I did Live Insurrection 5.1, which is a surround version of it in DVD. And then I did a bunch of like bonus tracks. And then I did Live in Anaheim, Halford Live in Anaheim. And that was a CD and a DVD. And they're different. The CD has a different mix and different master. And also the DVD, of course, has a 5.1 mix and a stereo mix that are different. So I mastered that stereo mix as well and the 5.1. And then I did Halford 4, which was Made of Metal. And I also did 2 singles, I think, from that record. One was The Mower, and there was, I think, another one. And then I did another Halford live, which was Super Satima Arena. And there was a CD of that. And then there was a DVD of that. And then I did some more bonus stuff. And some of the stuff I was also just audio supervisor. Like, so there was trying to remember, there was like a documentary. And so I did some audio supervising. So with the Halford camp, I did a bunch of stuff. Some of it was released as CDs, studio or live. Some of it was DVDs, and some of it was like bonus tracks. So the work I did with Rob Halford was basically working directly with Roy Z. So everything in that whole gamut of records, the CDs and the DVDs and the Blu-rays, was working with Roy Z, that, on all that aspect. I met Rob at shows, but I wasn't working directly with Rob. Everything was Roy Z and I were on the phone, meeting up in the studio. It was a close working relationship for years doing that. And of course, Roy Z and I have been doing a lot of records. Sometimes I am in the picture because there's leeway for the producer or mixer to choose the mastering engineer. Sometimes not. So whichever records I could be in, we work together. And we've done anything from Sepultura, Yngwie Malmsteen, Rob Halford, Fight. Trying to remember, there were a lot of other records. I mentioned Sepultura, Removes Silence, I think. I'm trying to remember all the...
Yeah, but there's a lot, yeah.
Yeah. Driver, he had a band called Driver. We did 2 records of Driver. There was a band called Delta Knot, which was Nick Menz's band.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we did an EP together. We did a band called Aria from Russia. They're a very famous Russian band, heavy metal band. We did Spirits of Fire, the first record. Yeah, there's a lot of records. I just don't remember all of them. There's a bunch. But yeah, the whole thing was basically Roy Z and I working together.
Gotcha. And Faith No More seems to be another band you've worked with quite a bit through the years.
Yes, but with Faith No More, I did their comeback record that came out, I think it was 2015, which was called Soul Invictus. And prior to that album, I did 2 singles of the record, but they're different mixes and different masters. One of them is Motherfucker, and one of them, that was the first one, and the B-side of it, which was a remix. I think it was J.G. Thirlwell that did the remix. And then the second single was Superhero and another remix, which I think was Alex Hake. I don't remember which one it was. And then we did the album, Soul Invictus, and then after that we did another single called Cone of Shame, which was a different master, but that was a mix that was during the record, because the first 2 singles were different mixes. And that had also a B-side. And then a year after, I remastered their first record, We Care a Lot, which is called now the We Care a Lot Deluxe Band Edition, which featured the original album from the original tapes, mastered from them. In this case, this was a capture of the original tapes. And then the bonus tracks were different, like demo versions of the songs, like a 16-track demo or 2 live shows versions, and maybe 8-track or I don't remember, but different demo versions, different mixes of it. So there's bonus material. So basically I did the last Faith No More record till today, and the first. So 2 singers.
Yeah. And of course you were back to the original tapes, so you had to compete against the original release of the first record.
Yeah, but the first record was on an indie label. It was before they got signed. So the record called We Care a Lot, which featured that song, later on had that song re-recorded again on their major label release.
Oh, gotcha.
Which came later on, which was called Introduce Yourself.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah, and that was in it as well. It's a great song. We Care a Lot.
Oh, yeah.
So,
one other artist, I'm talking to Jeff Pilson soon. Again, he's been on the show before, but I'm having him back on for a second time. And you did the Black Swan record, Shake the World. What's your experiences like working with Jeff Pilson?
So there was another band that Jeff was in called End Machine, I think, End Machine.
Yep.
So these two records were done on Frontiers by Alessandro Del Vecchio. Anyway, these two records were basically, they were done really well. And Alessandro did a great job on, production, mix, mastering, whatever he did. I basically took that master and kind of tweaked the master. So basically, Alessandro did everything on it. And I just took his final master and did really minute stuff, just to enhance little things. So that's a situation where you get a record that sounds already, where it should be. And your job is to not do anything that will ruin it. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like, actually volume level, I think I even either kept the same volume or even it's a bit lower, like point something. But my work was really minimal, was just small frequency things, and really to keep it the same, but a bit more translatable, in terms of like, you clear up a few frequencies here, there, or the process kind of cleans up a bit and it just translates better, but it's there. It was already there. You know what I mean? And so both the End Machine and Black Swan, I think they were done amazing, and he did a great job on it. So that's an example where you do 3 to 5% maybe. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, it's like really, really small.
When you were talking about legacy artists and trying to tie into their past and make it sound cohesive, it made me think of the Dokken record you did, Broken Bones, because you've got a classic legacy act, but at that point, I think it was just Don Dokken was the only one left. And so it's a different group of band members trying to sound like the classic sound, but also Don Dokken is not 25 years old anymore. So it sounds like that might have been a bit of a challenge to tie it in to make it sound like, that it would fit in with their classic albums, which I think was their goal on that record.
Good question. Especially nowadays, a lot of legacy bands don't always have the original members. That lineup, I think the guitar player was with him for a long time already.
Yeah, it's John Levin. Yeah.
I'm trying to think who was the bass. I think it was Sean McNabb. I think
it was
the bass player there, right? Yeah.
But and while Mick didn't play, I forget who played the drums, but he wasn't available. He was with Ted Nugent at the time.
Gotcha. So I'm trying to think who was the drummer there, but maybe Brian Tisci or Jimmy DeGrasso.
I think that's who it was.
Jimmy DeGrasso.
Yeah,
okay,
for sure.
So maybe both. Maybe. Anyway, a situation like that, I get the record as is, and me knowing how the band sounds, I can try to aim for that direction. But as always, I'm very dependent on the mixes coming in and the music too. So sometimes a record like that, you try to make it sound like what people remember from back then. Actually, I did get a lot of responses on that record where people told me that it kind of reminded them of the older ones. So I guess I did a good job on making it sound like the older records, I would say a good job. I mean, if that was the aim, then it went that direction. But yeah, a lot of times that's what kind of the expectation is. There are other times where a legacy artist wants to sound more modern, and then, or to a certain territory, going back like to Halford. Halford's territory is America and Europe. He has a lot of fans in both continents, so the sound that Halford has can reach both territories, because there's different sounds. Like in Europe and in America, it's different sounds, between the bands. They sound different. The American bands sound different than the European bands. you know. So yeah, when working on that record, it was a consideration that it has to sound more like, the direction. I would say the direction of the older Dokken records. Yeah, which hopefully I did a good job. But I guess that's what people told me. That it sounded in that direction. So I guess the aim was right, and the results, took it to that place.
Now, I'll just finish off with some good Canadian metal of Voivod. You've worked with them. How was that experience?
Amazing. Voivod is one of those bands that it's expect the unexpected. Okay. And that whatever you think you're going to get, it's probably going to be crazier than that, and I did the last 2 albums in EP. So I did Synchro Anarchy, Ultraman, and Morgoth Tales, and also another single, like a single they did for like a CD for a festival. And the guy who recorded and mixed them is Francis Perron. Did an amazing job. Everything is organic, like really sounding like together, and you hear what the band is. It's very representative of them, and that's one of those situations that you give something to it, but you don't want to alienate it. It has to stay what they are. They're very nice people. I just met them at a show here a few weeks ago, and it's a legacy band. Right now there's only 2 original members, the drummer and the singer. Bass player is different, and of course the guitar player, is replacing Piggy, who passed away. But Daniel is an amazing guitar player. Not only he knows how to play all the songs like amazingly great, but he fits to the band where he brings his thing to it, and it sounds original. It sounds like it's part of the band. And then they have the new bass player, Dominic. He's great too. He fits the tone, has this kind of sound in the mids and in the low end too, and it just works perfectly with Michelle and Dennis, are doing. And most people know them by their nicknames like Awe and Snake and Chewy and and Rocky. So yeah, that was a pleasure, and we got a Juno. Actually, have 2 Juno nominations: one for Synchro Anarchy, one for Morgoth Tales, and then we got a Juno for Synchro Anarchy, and but that was a pleasure working with them. It's not the first Canadian like metal band that I worked with. I've done Anvil, and I've done Annihilator. I did 2 records with Annihilator. One was Ballistic Sadistic. And then I did the record called Metal 2, which was like the first version of the record, the Metal, but in a new version of it with different players. So basically it's the second version of the record called Metal. So it's Metal 2. And in Anvil, I did a record called Hope in Hell. I think that was the record. And I did other Canadian bands like Econoline Crush and a bunch of other bands. So, yeah, I work with a lot of Canadians, and, it's fun. Other legacy bands that I worked with that was really cool was like Overkill and Sepultura and Cynic. The Gathering was a great band to work with. So yeah, there's a bunch of legacy stuff that was really fun working with. Also working with Gail B. Clark was really cool. I've known him for years, and I did his solo album and some singles and other projects he was involved with. So yeah, it's fun working with artists and bands you grew up working with or listening to. You grew up connected to the music, and it inspires you, and so yeah, it's fun. It's fun. Also Lee Aaron, yeah, she's Canadian too. Yeah, I did like 2 albums with her. So I try to do the best job I can, but I also understand that it's a matter of taste. And you can have 3 types of pizza, same dough, same sauce, same cheese, different toppings, and it will taste different. So you learn that in this type of art and business, you could do something that sounds amazing, but if it doesn't connect with the artist's vision, then it doesn't matter how great it is. They have to like it. Now, when it comes to the fans, you don't have any control because now it's out. If you're working with the artist, there might be a back and forth on the result. But once it hits the market, if the fans dig it or not, if the record is not great, even if it sounds great, they might not dig the record. And then you're like, oh, well, it's not a great record. Okay, well, you did the not great record of them.
Right. It's true.
You get punished. But sometimes you do a great record and people dig it, and then they're like, man, we love this record. And sometimes it's just not even the record, it's the marketing behind it. If the market doesn't accept the record or it's not being pushed enough, then it's not your fault. It might sound amazing. There's amazing records out there that just never hit it off. And sometimes they're one of the best works of the artist, but they're just underrated.
Okay, that was Maor Appelbaum. Hope you guys liked it. And moving forward, I've got the next 2 interviews already booked, so you'll be hearing from me again soon. Until next time, I'm Brian Sword. Thanks for listening.